20 years ago, I stood at the altar, looking at the woman I thought would be my partner for life. Melissa was my high school sweetheart. Funny, smart, and fiercely loyal. Or at least, that's what I believed. Together, we built a life filled with love, laughter, and trust. 2 decades of shared memories. Birthdays, vacations, quiet nights on the couch. I thought we had something rare, something unshakable. We weren't just husband and wife. We were best friends. Or so I thought. Our 20th anniversary was supposed to be a celebration of that bond. I planned every detail, from the restaurant to the guest list. Friends, family, even my Uncle Richard, who had been like a second father to me after my parents passed away. Everyone I cared about was there. That night, I sat across from the woman I loved, proud of everything we had built together. My heart was full, but something didn't feel right. There was an uneasiness I couldn't shake. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was nothing. She was laughing a little too hard at his jokes, leaning in a little too close. And then there was that look. A look I had never seen her give anyone but me. I told myself I was overthinking it. 20 years of love and trust couldn't be undone over a few fleeting moments. Could it? For the rest of the evening, I smiled, raised my glass for every toast, and laughed at every joke. But in the back of my mind, something gnawed at me, a quiet, persistent unease. I watched Melissa more closely, her laughter a bit too enthusiastic, her attention lingering on Richard longer than it should. It wasn't something you could call out, not yet, but it was there, a crack in the foundation I had spent 2 decades believing was solid. Melissa excused herself to step away from the table, saying she needed to freshen up. It wasn't unusual. It didn't even register as suspicious. But then I noticed Richard leaving not long after her, making an excuse about taking a call. My instincts flared, but I stayed seated. I couldn't be that guy, the paranoid husband creating a scene at our anniversary dinner. No, I'd wait. I'd observe. Minutes passed, and they didn't return. The guests at the table were too engrossed in their conversations to notice, but I couldn't help it. My eyes darted to the hallway where they had both disappeared. My mind was racing. Were they just talking? Was it nothing? Or was it something I couldn't yet bring myself to admit? When Melissa finally returned, she was smiling, but something about it felt practiced. I asked her casually if everything was all right, and she brushed it off with a light laugh, mentioning a long line in the restroom. Richard came back shortly after, looking as composed as ever, patting my shoulder as he sat down. "Fantastic dinner, Levi. You've outdone yourself," he said with his usual charm. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe this night, this marriage, this life I had built wasn't just a facade. But something about the way they both avoided each other's eyes for the rest of the evening told me otherwise. The next morning, the unease hadn't gone away. It had only grown. I found myself replaying the night in my head. Every glance, every laugh, every small gesture felt magnified. Was I going crazy? Was my mind making up a narrative that didn't exist? Or was it something else entirely? I decided to test my instincts. I casually asked Melissa about Richard later that day, bringing him up in conversation to see her reaction. Her answers were calm, casual, perfectly ordinary. But there was a slight hesitation in her voice when she talked about him, a pause that wasn't there before. "He's been through a lot," she said, her tone sympathetic. "It's nice to see him enjoying himself again." It was a harmless statement on the surface, but something about the way she said it made me feel like I was on the outside of an inside joke. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up late, scrolling through my phone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: comfort, distraction, maybe even validation. Instead, I found myself staring at her phone, sitting on the charger across the room. We never hid anything from each other. Passwords weren't an issue. But this time, something in me hesitated. This was a line I had never crossed before. Did I really want to? Did I really need to? I told myself I'd only look for a second, just to ease my mind. I unlocked her phone and opened her messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Conversations with friends, work colleagues, even me. But then I noticed a thread near the bottom of the list. It was titled simply Richard. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Most of the messages seemed harmless, updates about family events, casual chats. But then I saw it. A single text that made my heart stop. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again." I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over. There was no context, no clear proof, but it didn't matter. My hands shook as I locked the phone and set it back down. I sat there in the dark for hours, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Was I imagining things? Could there be an innocent explanation? Or was this the confirmation I had been dreading? The next morning, I watched her as she moved around the kitchen, humming softly as she made breakfast. She looked so normal, so familiar. How could the woman I had spent 20 years loving be capable of this? And Richard, my uncle, someone I had trusted my entire life, how could he betray me like this? I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to be absolutely sure before I tore our lives apart. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own home. I started paying closer attention to her habits, her movements, her phone. I noticed her texting more frequently, smiling at her screen when she thought I wasn't looking. I overheard her on the phone once, her voice low, her tone soft in a way I hadn't heard in years. When I walked into the room, she hung up quickly, saying it was a work call. I reached out to a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The investigator worked quickly, and within days, he confirmed what I had been too afraid to admit. Melissa and Richard were meeting regularly. Coffee shops, parks, even a hotel on the outskirts of town. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. By the end of that week, the man who had once trusted without question was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized. A man fueled by anger, hurt, and an overwhelming need for justice. It was time to act. The first step was to maintain appearances. I needed her to believe that everything was fine, that I was still the same man who trusted her implicitly. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I kissed her goodnight even when I could barely stand the sight of her. I played my part, knowing that the moment I tipped my hand too soon, I'd lose control of the situation. But inside, my mind was racing. Every lie she told, every fake smile she gave me, only fueled my determination. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure that she and Richard felt the full weight of their betrayal. I started small. I would casually ask her about her plans for the day, noting the times she claimed she'd be out running errands or meeting with friends. I'd compare her stories to the evidence the investigator provided, and every time, her lies became more apparent. She wasn't even careful anymore. She'd tell me she was going grocery shopping but end up at the same hotel where she and Richard had been meeting. It was during one of those errands that I decided to test the waters. She left the house one Saturday afternoon, saying she needed to pick up a few things for dinner. I waited a few minutes, then called her phone. When she answered, I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Hey, babe," I said casually. "Just checking in. Did you need me to pick anything up while I'm out?" There was a pause, just long enough to give her away. "Oh, no," she said, forcing a laugh. "I've got it covered. I'll be home soon." She hung up quickly, but I didn't need to press further. I already knew exactly where she was. I sat in the car outside that hotel for hours, watching her and Richard come and go like they had no care in the world. The rage simmered beneath my skin, but I kept my cool. I wasn't ready to make my move, not yet. The final straw came a week later. I had planted a recording device in her car, knowing it was the one place she felt secure enough to talk freely. What I heard confirmed everything. Conversations with Richard about their future, about how they needed to be careful, for now, but that it would all be worth it in the end. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. They were planning a life together, a life that didn't include me. Before we continue, we notice that 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to the channel yet. If you enjoy our stories, please consider supporting us by hitting the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. That night, I sat in our living room while she slept upstairs, listening to those recordings over and over again. My anger boiled into something sharper, colder. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them. I started by consulting a lawyer. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but I needed to protect myself first. The lawyer helped me secure my assets, ensuring that Melissa wouldn't walk away with a single dime of what we built together. I also had my will updated, cutting her out completely. If she wanted a future with Richard, it would come at the expense of everything we had built together. Next, I focused on Richard. He was a businessman, well known in our community. His reputation was everything to him. Through the private investigator, I gathered as much dirt on him as I could. Financial missteps, questionable dealings, even a few skeletons from his past that he probably thought no one knew about. And then, I waited. Melissa continued to play her part as the loving wife, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, texted me sweet messages during the day, and sat across from me at dinner with that same fake smile. But I saw through it all. Every word, every gesture was a lie, and I couldn't wait to see her face when the truth finally came out. It was a Thursday evening when I decided the time was right. I had spent the entire day putting the final pieces of my plan into place. When Melissa came home that night, I greeted her with the same warmth and affection I always did. I even suggested we open a bottle of wine and relax together after dinner. As we sat on the couch, sipping our drinks, I looked at her and said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about everything we've been through together." She smiled, her eyes soft. "Me too," she said. 20 years is a long time. I'm so grateful for you." The audacity of her words almost made me laugh, but I held my composure, nodding thoughtfully. "I'm grateful too," I said, "which is why I wanted to do something special for us." Her expression shifted slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" I stood up and walked over to the coffee table, where I had placed a small stack of papers earlier that evening. I handed them to her, watching as her smile faded with every page she turned. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's a divorce agreement," I said calmly. "I've already signed my part. All that's left is for you to do the same." Her eyes widened in shock, her hands shaking as she clutched the papers. "Levi, I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" I leaned in close, my voice low but firm. "Because I know, Melissa. I know about you and Richard. I know everything." Her face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the words. But I didn't give her the chance. "You threw away 20 years of trust and love for what? Him? A man who can't even keep his own life together." I let the weight of my words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Oh, and by the way, I've already sent copies of those recordings to Richard's wife. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to know the kind of man she's married to." Melissa broke down in tears, begging for forgiveness, swearing it was a mistake. But her words meant nothing to me anymore. The woman I had loved for 2 decades was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't forgive. As she sat there sobbing, I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her choices. The first act of my revenge was complete, but I wasn't done yet. The divorce papers were only the beginning. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done, not just emotionally, but financially, socially, and professionally. Betrayal on this scale deserved consequences of equal magnitude, and I was prepared to deliver them. The first step was securing my position. While Melissa wallowed in the shock of my revelation, I worked behind the scenes to ensure she would walk away with as little as possible. Our shared accounts were already frozen, and the house, legally under my name, was secured. Every asset she thought she could claim was either protected or moved into trusts she couldn't touch. I wasn't leaving her with a safety net. If she wanted a future, she could build it herself, without me. Next, I turned my focus to Richard, my uncle, my blood, the man who had smiled in my face and betrayed me behind my back. I wanted to strip him of everything he valued, his reputation, his finances, and the trust he had in the people around him. I wasn't just going to end his affair with Melissa. I was going to end his life as he knew it. I started with his professional world. Richard had always prided himself on his image as a successful businessman, but like most people with secrets, his facade was paper-thin. Thanks to the investigator, I had access to financial records, questionable business dealings, and even personal emails that painted a very different picture of the man he pretended to be. I compiled everything into a dossier, a damning collection of evidence that could ruin him if it ever went public. But simply having the information wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the pressure, the fear of knowing his empire was crumbling around him. I leaked small pieces of the dossier to key individuals in his network, business partners, investors, even his competitors. Anonymous emails, carefully timed calls. Nothing overt, but just enough to plant seeds of doubt and erode the trust he relied on. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Within weeks, Richard was scrambling to explain discrepancies in his accounts, justify decisions that suddenly seemed questionable, and repair relationships that were falling apart faster than he could manage. Watching him struggle was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I wanted him to know why this was happening and who was behind it. The opportunity came during a family gathering. It was a birthday celebration for one of my cousins, and I knew both Richard and Melissa would be there. I arrived early, playing the part of the dutiful family member, helping with decorations and chatting with relatives. By the time Richard showed up, I was ready. He greeted me with the same smug smile he always wore, as if nothing had happened. "Levi," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Good to see you." I smiled back, my expression neutral. "Richard," I said, my voice calm, "can I have a word?" I led him to a quiet corner of the house, away from the noise and laughter of the party. When we were alone, I pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to him. "Open it," I said simply. He frowned, his eyes narrowing as he tore open the envelope. Inside were copies of the most incriminating pieces of evidence I had gathered. Emails, bank statements, photos of him and Melissa together. His face turned pale as he flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. What is this?" he stammered. "It's your life, Richard," I said. "Or at least, what's left of it." He looked up at me, his expression a mix of fear and anger. "Levi, I can explain." I cut him off. "Don't bother. I don't care about your excuses, and I don't want your apologies. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with the consequences." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You've already started to feel it, haven't you? The deals falling through, the whispers behind your back, the people distancing themselves from you. That's me, Richard. That's what happens when you betray family." His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing too late that the ground beneath him was crumbling. I leaned in, my voice cold. "And this is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, you won't have a business, a reputation, or a penny to your name. And Melissa? She's not going to be there to save you. She'll be too busy trying to figure out how to rebuild her life without me." I stepped back, letting him absorb my words. "Enjoy the party, Richard. It might be the last time anyone looks at you with respect." I walked away, leaving him standing there, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. Back in the main room, I found Melissa. She was laughing with a group of relatives, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. For the first time since this ordeal began, I was in control. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, both Melissa and Richard would feel the full force of my revenge. And yet, even as I planned my next move, a part of me wondered if it would be enough. Could any amount of retribution truly balance the scales? Or was I chasing something I could never fully achieve? The answer didn't matter. Not yet. There was still work to be done. With Melissa and Richard now firmly in my sights, I shifted from planning to execution. This was no longer about gathering information or planting seeds of doubt. It was about delivering the crushing blows that would ensure they'd never recover. I started with Melissa. By now, she had signed the divorce papers, likely believing it was the worst thing that could happen to her. She was wrong. I wanted her to feel the weight of her decisions, not just emotionally but financially. Over the years, I had been meticulous about our finances. Melissa hadn't realized how much control I had over our assets, or how little she had contributed to them in the eyes of the law. With the divorce finalized, she was left with almost nothing. The house? Mine. The savings? Secured. Even her car was technically under my name. The day she moved out was one I'll never forget. She stood in the driveway, her belongings packed into a few boxes, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice trembling. "We built this life together." I met her gaze, my expression cold. "No, Melissa. I built this life. You were just along for the ride." She didn't respond. There was nothing she could say. She got into the car, a rental, since her own had been repossessed, and drove away. As I watched her disappear down the street, I felt no sympathy, no regret. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. But Melissa was only half of the equation. Richard was next, and his fall was going to be far more public. I timed my moves carefully. By now, his business partners were already questioning his integrity thanks to the documents I had leaked. Deals were falling through, and his finances were in disarray. But I wanted more. I wanted everyone to see the man he truly was. I arranged for a meeting with one of his largest clients, pretending to be an anonymous whistleblower concerned about their dealings with Richard's company. I provided them with detailed evidence of his financial mismanagement and unethical practices, enough to make them not only sever ties with him, but also report him to the authorities. Within days, Richard was facing multiple investigations, his company's reputation in shambles. But I wasn't finished. I had one more card to play, and it was the one I had been saving for the perfect moment. It was a Saturday evening, just like the one where this nightmare had started. Richard was hosting a charity gala, an event he had planned months ago. It was supposed to be a celebration of his success, a way to bolster his image in the community. Instead, it became the stage for his undoing. I arrived uninvited, blending into the crowd as if I belonged there. Richard was in his element, shaking hands and smiling for photos, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As the night went on, I waited for the right moment, a moment when all eyes were on him. It came during his speech. He stood at the podium, thanking everyone for their support and talking about the importance of integrity and trust in business. The irony was almost too much to bear. As he spoke, I stepped forward, holding a stack of papers, the same incriminating documents I had compiled weeks ago. "Excuse me, Richard," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. "I think it's time we talked about the truth." His face turned pale as he recognized me. "Levi, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place," I said, cutting him off. I held up the documents for everyone to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man you're applauding tonight is a fraud. Everything he's built is based on lies, deceit, and betrayal, and I have the evidence to prove it." The crowd murmured in shock as I began reading aloud excerpts from the documents, emails, financial records, even details of his affair with Melissa. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his reputation. By the time I was finished, the room was in chaos. Guests were whispering, leaving their seats, some even confronting Richard directly. He stood there, frozen, his carefully constructed image crumbling before his eyes. "You're ruining me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise. I leaned in close, my voice low but firm. "You ruined yourself, Richard. I'm just making sure everyone knows it." I walked out of the gala, leaving him to deal with the fallout. By the next morning, news of the scandal had spread. Social media was flooded with posts about the event, and his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. His clients pulled out of remaining contracts, his investors demanded answers, and his family, the ones who had always looked up to him, turned their backs on him. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. Melissa was gone. Richard was ruined, and I had taken back control of my life. But even as I stood there, watching the world burn around them, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. Revenge had given me a sense of power, a way to reclaim what I had lost. But at what cost? That question would haunt me long after the flames died down. But for now, I was content to watch them burn. The days following the gala were eerily quiet. After weeks of chaos, planning, and confrontation, there was suddenly nothing left to do. My revenge was complete. Melissa was out of my life. Richard's career and reputation were in ruins, and I had walked away from both of them with my dignity intact, or so I thought. At first, the silence felt like a victory. I went about my days with a sense of finality, as if I had tied off the loose ends of a chapter that needed to be closed. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the marriage, started focusing more on my health, and even took up hobbies I hadn't touched in years. It felt good, liberating, even. But as the weeks passed, I realized that something was missing. The anger that had driven me for so long was gone, but it hadn't left behind the peace I had expected. Instead, there was an emptiness, a hollow space where my marriage, my trust, and my sense of security had once been. One night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the divorce papers Melissa had signed. It was the final reminder of what we had been and what we had lost. I thought about the 20 years we had spent together, the memories we had shared, the dreams we had built. Were they all lies? Had she ever truly loved me? Or had our life together been nothing more than a convenient arrangement for her? I thought about Richard, too. Growing up, he had been a role model to me, a man I had admired and looked up to. He had been there for me in ways no one else had, guiding me through some of the most challenging times in my life. And yet, he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't understand how someone who had meant so much to me could throw it all away for a fleeting affair. The questions weighed on me, and no amount of revenge could answer them. I had destroyed their lives, but I couldn't erase the scars they had left on mine. One evening, I received a call from Melissa. I hadn't heard from her since she left, and seeing her name on my phone brought a flood of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, curiosity. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Levi," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. I just wanted to talk." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, as if she was struggling to find the words. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said finally, "but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." Her apology caught me off guard. For weeks, I had imagined what I would say to her if given the chance, how I would confront her with the pain she had caused. But now, hearing her voice, I felt none of the satisfaction I had expected. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Why, Richard? Why throw away everything we had?" There was another long silence. When she spoke, her voice was trembling. "I don't know," she said. "It wasn't planned. It just happened. I was selfish, Levi. I made a mistake, and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I wanted to believe her. Part of me even wanted to forgive her, but I couldn't. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "I don't need your regrets," I said. "I needed your loyalty, your honesty, and you couldn't give me that." She started to cry, but I didn't have the energy to console her. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Melissa," I said before hanging up. It was the last time we spoke. As for Richard, I never heard from him again. The fallout from the gala had been catastrophic for him. His business collapsed, his wife left him, and his name became a punchline in the very circles he had once dominated. He disappeared from the public eye, and as far as I was concerned, he could stay gone. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me. Slowly but surely, I started to heal, but the scars remained. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Every new relationship felt like a risk, every kind word like a potential lie. I realized that the betrayal had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had made me stronger, yes, but also more guarded, more cynical. One day, a close friend asked me if I regretted what I had done, if the revenge had been worth it. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "It gave me closure," I said. "It helped me take back control, but it didn't fix what they broke, and it didn't fix me." Looking back, I realized that revenge wasn't the answer. It was a reaction, a way to cope with the pain and anger I couldn't process any other way. But in the end, it was only a temporary relief. The real work, the real healing, came from letting go, from moving on. As I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt a sense of clarity. My story wasn't about the betrayal or the revenge. It was about resilience, about finding the strength to rebuild after everything had fallen apart. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Life didn't change overnight. Healing is not a destination. It's a journey. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when the memories of betrayal resurfaced. Melissa's laughter at that dinner table, Richard's smug smile, the texts, the recordings. Those moments would sting, a dull ache reminding me of everything I had lost. But each time, the sting felt a little less sharp. The pain no longer defined me. I started to focus on the things I could control. I rebuilt my routine, pouring energy into my work and hobbies. The house that once felt like a prison slowly became a sanctuary. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and made it my own. Each change felt like reclaiming a part of myself. One day, I stumbled across an old photo album tucked away in the back of a closet. It was filled with pictures of Melissa and me, smiling, happy, unaware of the storm that would one day shatter everything. For a long time, I stared at those photos, feeling a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for what had been lost, but gratitude for the lessons I had learned. I didn't burn the photos or throw them away. Instead, I closed the album and placed it back in the closet. It was part of my past, a chapter of my life that had shaped me, for better or worse. And while I couldn't forget it, I no longer felt the need to dwell on it. Months turned into a year, and slowly, the person I used to be started to resurface. I found joy in small things, a quiet morning with coffee, a walk in the park, a conversation with an old friend. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. I was living in the moment. Eventually, I decided to try dating again. It wasn't easy. The fear of being hurt again loomed large, and trusting someone new felt like an insurmountable task. But I reminded myself that not everyone was Melissa, and not every relationship was doomed to fail. Slowly, cautiously, I opened myself up to the possibility of love again. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost. It was about finding something new, something different. I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for honesty, for connection, for someone who could meet me where I was and walk with me toward a better future. And then there was Richard. As much as I tried to forget him, his shadow lingered on the edges of my mind. I didn't hate him anymore, not really. The anger had burned itself out long ago, leaving behind only a quiet disappointment. He had been more than just an uncle. He had been a friend, a mentor, a part of my family, and he had destroyed all of that for a fleeting moment of selfishness. I never sought him out, and he never reached out to me. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he had moved away, trying to rebuild his life in a different city. Maybe he succeeded. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it didn't matter. His story was no longer my concern. As the anniversary of the divorce approached, I decided to do something for myself. I booked a solo trip to a place I had always wanted to visit but never had the chance, Italy. It was a decision I made on a whim, but it felt right. I wanted to see the world, to experience new things, to remind myself that life was bigger than the pain I had endured. The trip was transformative. Wandering the streets of Rome, standing in awe of the Colosseum, savoring the simple pleasure of fresh pasta and wine. It reminded me of the beauty that still existed in the world. I met people from all walks of life, each with their own stories, struggles, and triumphs. And for the first time in years, I felt truly connected to something greater than myself. When I returned home, I felt lighter, freer. The weight I had been carrying for so long was finally beginning to lift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Looking back, I realized that my story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience, about finding the strength to rebuild after everything had fallen apart. It was about learning to let go, not just of the people who had hurt me, but of the pain and anger that had held me back. To anyone listening to this story, I want you to know this. Betrayal can break you, but it doesn't have to define you. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it's not the answer. The real victory lies in moving forward, in choosing to live a life that is full, authentic, and your own. So, to those who've been hurt, who felt the sting of betrayal, I say this. Take your time to grieve, to feel the anger, the sadness, the loss. But don't let it consume you. You are stronger than you know, and your story is far from over. As I close this chapter of my life, I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. The scars remain, but they no longer define me. They are simply a part of who I am, a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come. Wild Love Story isn't just a name. It's a testament to the wild, unpredictable, and sometimes painful journey that love can take us on. If my story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or understood, then I hope you'll stick around. There are so many more stories to share, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. And if you've ever experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. And remember, your story isn't over. It's just beginning.